Since the nationwide wave of protests began just a couple of months ago, here on the channel we've talked about it a lot, but our focus has almost necessarily been the things that you can see. Footage of the actual protests, talking with people about what they'd like to see happen, violence, sometimes murderous violence against the protesters. But the entire experience can't just be encapsulated with what you can see with your eyes. Some of it is an emotional and traumatic experience. And joining us now to help us better understand that side of this entire thing is trauma therapist, speaker, and author Ashley McGirt. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. We very much enjoyed an interview that you took part in with Vice about this sort of experience of finding that some of the people who look to you for help, that these numbers are increasing. So tell us a little bit about what your experience has been like since this entire thing began.
Yeah, no, there's definitely been a rise in the number of people who are reaching out to me. Protest trauma is a very real thing. A lot of times we don't recognize the impact that just watching something on the media can have on our psyche, our mental health, our ability to actually function day to day. So I'm seeing a lot of people who were directly at the protest who experienced some things and now feel as though they're suffering from PTSD. And then there's people who just heard about it or watched it on the news and it's taking a toll on both their physical body and their mental health.
Yeah, this particular, especially in the first month or so, the constant brutalizing of the protesters by the police, the footage of them using their cars and things like that, and that hasn't entirely gone away. But there was a period where it was really bad. I assume that probably stands out for some people, that the fact that the police who are supposed to be protecting their right to protest were actually turning against them in many instances.
Definitely. So it's been really disheartening for a lot of people who didn't recognize that these things actually occur and that the police who are actually employed to serve and protect can sometimes harm us. And here, especially in Seattle, where I live, the police, they were doing things like flashbangs, rubber bullets. So many of my friends, my peers, and people that I know who just went out to support Black Lives Matter ended up being shot by rubber bullets or
Wow.
having the fragments from some of the flashbangs because people don't recognize that when those things go off, it like shatters. And so a lot of people have burns, shatters on their legs. And I really give it up to the medics who have been serving during the protests and out there because a lot of people actually weren't coming to show up.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember some of the shots of the aftermath of rubber bullets hitting people in the face and things like that, and it looks like this is they call it a non-lethal weapon, but it certainly looks capable of some unthinkable violence. And I wonder too, this has been a period for several months where there have been, like, the cases that initially started the protests. There have been so many other cases that are so similar in some ways, and the media has been a little bit more attentive to covering it than they might have been beforehand. I wondered, is that also reflected in people's trauma, that the media becomes sort of filled with these cases that are so dark, so depressing, so tragic? Is that something that people talk about?
Yeah, so there's actually twofold. What I've been seeing in my sessions with the clients who I serve is a lot of anxiety just around the fact that now the media is recognizing that this is problem. Now it's something that's constantly shown on the news, whereas it wasn't shown, when Eric Garner or Trayvon Martin, like this isn't new. These things have been happening since
Yeah.
before I've been alive. They're just exacerbated. And now many of us are at home, we're working from home, so we're able to actually spend more time watching things or being exposed. And it's really causing a huge impact on our mental health. And for the Black community and other people of color who know that this isn't new, it's really
Mhm.
disheartening. And it's like, okay, it's twofold. So we're happy that you guys are covering these stories and you're talking about it, but then there's also a bit of a sadness. Like, you didn't see me when Eric Garner couldn't breathe, but
Yeah.
now you see me when George Floyd had a knee to his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Yeah. That makes me think of something that you said in the Vice interview, where you were talking about, after emancipation, there was no grief counseling, there was no trauma counseling that was provided, that this goes back so long. And I know that one of your specializations is specifically in racial trauma. How does that area, how does that shape either the conversations that you have or the help that you try to provide?
Yeah, so I do a lot of intergenerational healing. So I have to look at culture and things that have been passed down. And we see that through epigenetics, our DNA has been changed by what our ancestors experienced. And like you mentioned, during slavery, after we were freed, no one sat down the free slaves for any type of group therapy, individual therapy. And these people watched their family members being lynched, being sold off. And now in 2020, we're still watching modern day lynchings. And so this is why I really do the work that I do so that I can help heal those who have been exposed to vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, which that's the type of trauma that it didn't actually happen to you directly, but you heard about it, you seen it, you witnessed it. All of these things impact us and take a toll on our body. So I like to do a lot of progressive muscle relaxation, healing of the body, especially because as this continues to happen, we continue to hear about it on the news, we develop a certain level of emotional resilience, but our bodies don't. And then our bodies start shutting down, which is why a huge portion of Black people die at disproportionate rates than our white counterparts at extremely young ages from chronic stress related illnesses like, heart failure, um, stress, strokes. My own grandmother passed away from a stroke, and I attribute it to a lot of the stress that she experienced in her life and not having the tools accessible to her, like therapy.
Yeah. So you're doing everything you can to try to help. Like nationally, what could be done? Does there need to be an investment in trauma therapists like you to make it more available? Do resources need to be made available? Because obviously it's difficult. Not everyone can afford therapy or have access to therapy. Is that something that some sort of top-down approach could help?
Exactly. There's a whole host of things that we can be doing to actually ensure the mental health and well-being of our people, but it really starts at access to resources, ensuring that it's available. I'm doing my part, which I've created the Washington Therapy Fund Foundation to eliminate some of the barriers to Black healing in my community. And because I live in California part-time, I'm also starting one in California. But I would like to see some sort of free therapy resources and paying the therapist because this is hard work. And when we look at services like Medicaid or state funded insurances, the reimbursement rates can be extremely low, and then therapists get burnout and they're less likely to do the job, or there's not enough therapists available to serve. So, making
Yeah.
the licensing requirements also more accessible to those looking at the cost of education. This is an extremely expensive process. Looking at the way that we treat, moving from a crisis centered model to a preventative model, because right now, the way insurances and the healthcare services set up, it's to look at, are you in crisis? If you
Mhm.
are just coming to me for an everyday issue, you want to talk, you don't meet anything in the DSM, which is the therapist Bible, then I can't bill insurance because they want to
Yeah.
see that you're in crisis. And that should not be the case.
Yeah. Yeah, and the way that you were talking about the fact that something can start off as this emotional traumatic experience, but then it can manifest in physical symptoms. I'm assuming by the time it hits the crisis level necessary, we've already seen that. That's already sort of baked in at that point.
Exactly. And then the other issue is also how we diagnose and treat based on race, because we're seeing these issues and these symptoms, but I can have a white male walk into a psychiatric facility who's showing the same exact psychotic symptoms as a Black male, and the Black man is more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, whereas the
Wow.
white male is more likely to be diagnosed with bipolar, because we look at bipolar as something that is more manageable, whereas schizophrenia is an episodic disorder. It's something that society looks at as, one of the worst illnesses. You're
Yeah.
really stigmatized when you have schizophrenia.
Wow. And there was one other aspect that you talked about with Vice that I wanted to find out more about. I know that you said that there are these large corporate clients that are expressing interest in getting involved in all this, like some of the biggest companies literally in the world, Lockheed Martin, Amazon, and things like that.
Mhm.
Does that is that a good thing? Does that give you hope? Is it like I'm about very cynical about corporations and what they've done over the past few months. So my fear is that this is sort of trying like a shallow sort of attempt to appear to be invested. In your communications with them, does it seem genuine and substantive?
So I'm still learning. I'm still formulating an opinion on that. When it comes to these organizations, I'm noticing that it is the Black employee network of these organizations that are actually reaching out to me. So their corporate ambassadors and their CEOs are showing up on the calls. Sometimes they stay there for the whole time. Sometimes they leave after they do their introduction and show their face that they support it. So it's twofold. I do really applaud Amazon because they've brought me in probably 5 times in the last month for continuous workshops. But I do look at the companies and I recognize who's there on the call, who stays, who organized this meeting, and how are you actually implementing the things that I say in my training into your work, and how are you actually listening to the people who show up on the calls, because they're expressing a lot of things about how white supremacy culture is embedded in the work and how microaggressions and other things impact them on a day to day.
Yeah. I just want to thank you both for joining us on the show, but also for, calling attention to it in Vice. It's just a part of this that I had not thought nearly enough about, but needs to be a part of the solution going forward. And so, Ashley McGrath, I want to thank you once again. Very important work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.